After just 48 hours of a ceasefire, Hamas is already violating the terms of the agreement, refusing to hand over the remains of all the hostages who were murdered in captivity. Israel has responded with threats to keep crossings closed until the situation changes, while the families of the hostages appealed for help to United States Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. And meanwhile, President Donald Trump assured reporters that Hamas will be disarmed, adding that if they don't disarm voluntarily, as they agreed to, they will be disarmed involuntarily and perhaps violently. He also said, "I'm not playing games." Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also told the media that terrorist organization Hamas will be disarmed or everything will erupt. For its part, Hamas is busy executing its opponents and making videos of the executions to post on the internet. Some Western leaders have expressed concerns over this, but President Trump told reporters it doesn't really bother him. However, the violations of the ceasefire with Israel do bother the president and many others, and this has now included approaching IDF positions and pushing children into the perimeter area to serve as human shields. That's what Hamas is doing. And meanwhile, some remains of hostages who were murdered in captivity have been transferred to the Red Cross and then onto the IDF, although Hamas did not immediately announce their identities. On the diplomatic front, the Egyptian foreign minister announced that members of the council to administer Gaza after the war have been chosen, while the president of Lebanon has said he is interested in talking directly with Israel. TBN Israel senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani will bring us all the truth about lasting peace and a shared vision, along with all the other full statements from the Sharm el-Sheikh summit. And finally, Iran has made an unprecedented threat to hit Israel with nuclear missiles. Welcome to Boots on the Ground. I'm your host Yair Pinto, and with me today is Mati Shoshani, and together we are bringing you Boots on the Ground, the report that exposes all the truth about what's happening in Israel. So make sure to hit that subscribe button so that you never miss anything, and let's go to see what happened in the last 24 hours. As Hamas continues to take their time returning the remains of the hostages who were murdered in captivity in Gaza, United States President Donald Trump said that Hamas knows he is not playing games and confirmed that his senior representatives spoke directly with representatives of the terrorist organization. And meanwhile, an Israeli source said that the intelligence echelon has a mechanism for passing information to the Hamas leadership, and they have used it to tell them where to look for some of the remains that they saw that they cannot find. On Tuesday evening, the Prime Minister's office confirmed that 4 additional coffins of remains arrived at the Institute of Forensic Medicine for identification of the remains, as a solemn announcement came from President Trump's that the war is over. Prime Minister Netanyahu also warned that the conditions are clear. Hamas must relinquish its weapons. In an interview with CBS, he said that he intends to expand the peace, while adding that he hopes that the next stage of the deal will proceed. However, Israel has said that as long as Hamas does not return the remains of all the hostages who are murdered in captivity, Israel will not open the Rafah border crossing, and the shipments of aid will not be fully resumed. And meanwhile, some of the family members of the hostages have appealed to the United States Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, saying, "What we feared is now happening before our eyes." But Hamas is not only talking about violations of the agreement that it made with America and with Israel, it is also violating the human rights of its own people, conducting gruesome public executions of its domestic opponents inside the Gaza Strip, other Palestinians, and posting films and images of these events to the internet. Hamas is giving this campaign of terror and repression the name Operation Restoring Security and Governance, while opponents say it is nothing but an old-fashioned operation to terrorize the population into submitting to their rule. After hinting that he gave a green light to Hamas to deal with the clans, the United States president told reporters they took care of some gangs. However, he also pledged to strip the terrorist organization of its weapons, saying, "I'm not playing games." The IDF also reported this week that suspects approached forces beyond the yellow line in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip and were stopped, with reports indicating there were some fatalities. Hamas has also begun to push Palestinian children into the perimeter areas to try and provoke the IDF into opening fire at children so that they can say that Israel is once again murdering Palestinian children. Will the global media once again echo the Hamas narrative while ignoring the evil conduct of this terrorist organization? What do you think? We might be able to find out really soon. However, there are some things that are already coming into view, and that includes a new report that is revealing the state of Hamas's armaments. The bottom line is that even after 2 years of war, Hamas remains weak and dismantled but not completely destroyed. According to the Aram News, this is a website, the organization lost most of its missiles and UAVs but retains light weapons and also tunnels. On a diplomatic front, Egyptian Foreign Minister Badr Abdel Aitai said that 15 technocrats were chosen to serve on the Administrative Council to manage the Gaza Strip after the war. And speaking of Egypt, TBN Israel senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani will give us a review of the peace summit in Sharm el-Sheikh after the White House published the full statement signed by the United States President Donald Trump, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and Qatar's Amir Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani. You might have noticed that there was no European leader who signed this agreement, and that's because France is trying to advance an initiative for a Palestinian state on top of Trump's plan, while Germany is much more cautious. The EU wants to be involved in the situation beyond transferring hundreds of millions of euros to the Palestinian Authority. They also want to deploy forces at the Rafah crossings, but when the arrangement was finalized, the Europeans were not there. Only Americans, regional players like Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey. And finally, Iran has made another threat towards Israel, this time via an artificial intelligence video displaying a nuclear missile under the caption, "Maybe." Iran's foreign ministry also has harsh criticism of the United States president's speech at the Israeli Knesset, the parliament. They really didn't like what he had to say about how, without his order to strike the nuclear facilities in Iran, he would not have succeeded in reaching the agreement in Gaza. But the president also offered friendship to Iran in his speech, although so far it doesn't seem to interest anybody in there. But we have a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, with me is Mati Shoshani, and this is your daily boots on the ground report about what's happening in Israel, including the battle against the terrorist organization Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shia militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in this region that are taking their orders from Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. A moment before we begin, I want to call on you to continue and help us spread the truth. Everyone says that the war is over, but we at Boots on the Ground know what's happening. And right now, Israel stands in a war for sharing what's happening here, for the truth. Every day, terrible lies about Israel are spread by extremist Islamic organizations. So for us to defeat the evil in this world, we need your help. So share, leave a comment, click the like button, and most importantly, make sure to subscribe to TBN Israel on YouTube if you haven't already, and never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. The scenario for which Israel has prepared has materialized as Hamas violated the agreement for the very start when it announced the release of only 4 hostage remains out of the 28 that it holds. The IDF spokesperson, Brigadier General Efi Defrin, said that since this became known, efforts were being made at all levels to compel the terrorist organization to abide by this agreement. It's important to note that already when the agreement was signed, it was known that the terror organization would not manage to return all 28 bodies within the 72 hours alluded to it. But the expectation in Israel was that only 9 would not be returned right away, a number that later grew to 12. Hamas's announcement of only 4 surprised many, including the hostage family's headquarters, which said it received with astonishment and shock the news of Hamas's blatant violation of this agreement. It emphasized that the government and the mediators must act to correct this injustice as soon as possible. On that note, after the initial 4 sets of remains were turned over to the Red Cross on Monday and late on Tuesday evening, another 4 were handed over in Gaza City. A team of forensic experts from the police who entered the Gaza Strip examined the coffins that the Red Cross brought to make sure that there were no booby traps or other dirty tricks by Hamas, and immediately afterward they were covered with the national Israeli flag. If anyone thinks that these precautions are excessive, we remind you that in Sajaiya, in the Gaza Strip on Tuesday, Hamas tried to send some gunmen to test the IDF's resolves by approaching a position inside the buffer zone. These 5 terrorists were quickly eliminated, and the IDF has warned that this might not be the last such incident. Hamas is attempting to shape the future parameters of the confrontation with Israel, despite having lost the war and essentially being forced by their own allies, Turkey and Qatar, to accept a humiliating defeat. In this context, I must pause for just a moment and give some credit to IDF Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir. Although there were loud voices in the political echelon demanding that the IDF be unleashed to go into Gaza City with full power, he stood like a rock against this pressure, knowing that it would lead to the destruction of the hostages, who he believed could still be freed alive. He was proven correct, and his plan has proven to be the best one, because the hostages are back. Zamir understood the price that Israel would pay if fallen soldiers and harm to the hostages would take place while capturing the Gaza City area, and it is doubtful that that would have produced the desired outcome in the situation. He preferred to work methodically, deliberately, exploiting the IDF's military power and not risking our troops and the hostages. He decided to encircle Gaza City, evacuate the hundreds of thousands of residents who had served as human shields for Hamas, while carefully annihilating Hamas's Gaza brigade, dismantling its defensive lines and also its governments. It is also reasonable to assume that the commanders of Hamas's Gaza brigade pressured Hamas abroad to reach an agreement, and the sooner the better, because they want to stay alive. However, after the IDF's withdrawal to the Yellow Line, Hamas is trying to rehabilitate itself, or at least improve its standings internally, and also externally with Israel and with the international community. It sent its men into the streets to make a show of still being in charge, and is also brutally cracking down on those who are accused of collaborating with Israel. Of course, by that they mean any Palestinian who did anything whatsoever that caused Hamas any kind of problems over the last 2 years, whether it was in direct support of Israel or not. Israel would like to assist the families and the clans within the Gaza area which have stood up to Hamas and tried to establish some kind of alternative governments there. And the IDF has positioned itself in areas dominating the Gaza City area, the central camps, and the neighborhoods in Khan Yunis. In some places, the IDF is not sitting on the yellow lines, but tens of hundreds of meters to the east. This has been done for 2 reasons. First, the IDF prefers to be in dominating locations with better tactical defensive capabilities for the forces on the ground, that is, not inside populated areas and in elevated zones, also known as the high ground. So the second reason is that the IDF understands that the second stage of this ceasefire may last for months, to at least even 2 years, and therefore the IDF is already now at this moment building a long-term defensive line in Gaza. Hamas is already testing these lines amongst other ways by sending unarmed civilians, sometimes children, towards the yellow lines to test the IDF's alertness and its responses. However, it is also mixing this up with attempts to send armed terrorists close to the IDF positions, perhaps hoping that they can get close enough to inflict some casualties while the IDF hesitates to fire, thinking this is probably just more children. You see how evil Hamas is? Let me know what you think in the comments. I'm curious, or is it just me seeing this situation? If a nervous or inexperienced IDF soldier will fire on an unmanned, unarmed child in the Gaza Strip that Hamas sent towards his position, Hamas can say that the IDF is once again murdering Palestinian children for no reason. If the IDF soldier holds his fire because he thinks that the person approaching his position is probably just another unarmed child, Hamas fighters that were sent could get close enough to inflict casualties or maybe even kidnap an IDF soldier to hold him hostage. If the IDF opens fire on an armed Hamas fighter and he is eliminated, Hamas doesn't care because it knows it can always find more young Palestinian lives to throw away in this manner. In any case, Hamas can always count on the global media to portray whatever happens in the way that makes Israel look bad and makes them look good. Despite this, the IDF has sketched out for the Americans, the Egyptians, the Turks, the Qataris, and also for Hamas, the new rules in the ground. Following the events earlier this week, the military echelon recommended closing the Rafah border crossing, reducing the entry of aid, and also threatening that the IDF is prepared to move forward from the yellow line westward towards the Gaza city and other key areas inside the Gaza Strip. Within minutes, the Egyptians, the Qataris, and the Americans made clear to Hamas that they must act immediately to produce the remains of the fallen hostages, and within a short period of time, 4 more sets of remains were handed over to the Red Cross. More sets of remains are likely to be produced very soon, and Israel has many levers of pressure that it can apply, as it is no longer bound in its maneuvering capability in the Gaza Strip because all the living hostages are in Israel, and Hamas has no more Israeli human shields. Therefore, in the coming days, the way that the IDF acts and the political echelon acts will determine how the Gaza border stabilizes and is being shaped. And on that note, it's important to point out that Israel has communicated information to Hamas, to the mediators, about the whereabouts of some of the remains of the hostages so that they can be recovered and returned to Israel. Now, with all of that in mind, it's also important to point out that Hamas still has some cards to play. Although they lost this war and have been utterly defeated on the battlefield, they still have some military capabilities. And this week, the Emirati news site IRIN News published a comprehensive analysis of the military capabilities of Hamas and their movement in the Gaza Strip after 2 years of war against Israel. According to this report, before the war held, Hamas roughly had 20,000 short and long-range rockets, with the ability to launch thousands of rockets over short intervals. They also had a small arsenal of rockets with a maximum range of 250 kilometers, which put all of Israel's major population centers and cities in range. Most of these rockets were produced in the Gaza, and some were smuggled from Iran. The site noted that after the war, Hamas is left with about 3,000 rockets, a drop of about 90% of the previous stockpile that they have, but still a dangerous weapon that it can potentially wield against the Jewish state of Israel. However, most of the remaining rockets are crude, short-range weapons, and the rate of launches has fallen to an unprecedented low, with only 2 launches reported in September. It was also noted that the explosives in the remaining rockets are mostly from unexploded ordnance that Israel fired at Hamas in this war that didn't explode. Recovering this material is very dangerous and has resulted in a number of casualties to the Hamas terrorist regime. Furthermore, Hamas has lost many of the underground factories and machine tools that it used to produce the rockets and the other weapons. The report went on to say that prior to this war, Hamas operated dozens of drones and about 35 loitering UAVs, some designed in the spirit of Iranian models. The UAVs were used to reconnaissance and to gather intelligence, but also to attack, including on October 7th, when observation towers were destroyed. There is no precise estimate of the number of drones that Hamas retains at this moment, but once again, the workshops and the tools used to produce them have been destroyed in this war. Therefore, Hamas is currently focusing, according to the report, on small and simple drones or on smuggled versions via the border. It was also reported that before this war, Hamas possessed thousands of small arms, including rifles, machine guns, sniper rifles, and about 300 anti-tank missiles, alongside hundreds of mines and improvised charges. Now, the organization is left with stockpiles of light weapons only, used for guerrilla operations and for ambushes. Some of the weapons include stored rifles and machine guns, but Hamas currently does not have a significant capability to employ them within wide-scale fightings. At present, the organization has only basic capabilities to produce improvised explosive devices from unexploded ordnance. Production is very limited, mainly due to the blockade and to the lack of raw materials inside the Gaza Strip. The Emirati site's report emphasizes that despite the heavy losses Hamas sustained, including the elimination of the senior leadership, the destruction of the fighting brigade, and the almost total loss of control in the Gaza Strip, the organization still exists and is active in a mysterious way. According to the site, this makes turning the ceasefire into a permanent peace agreement a very complex task. And here, at TBN Israel, we will continue to update you with all the truth directly from the Gaza Strip and bring you everything that you need to know in order to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. So make sure to hit that subscribe button so that you remain tuned to everything that's happening on the ground, boots on the ground style. Now, I want to talk to you for just a moment about a very special group of people who have been deeply affected by the events of the last 2 years. In the aftermath of this terrible war, our brave and battered Holocaust survivors are suffering like never before. These men and women endure history's darkest chapter, and now, in their final years, many face poverty, loneliness, and fear. 1 in 3 survivors in Israel lives in poverty. Many are over 90 years of age, struggling with serious medical needs, and since October 7th, most say that their quality of life has collapsed. They sit in cold, empty apartments, often without safe rooms as sirens wail. So Meir Panim is a lifeline for them. Every day, 2,200 survivors receive hot meals and delivers, while hundreds of others are cared for in their centers. This is where they celebrate holidays together like family. This holiday season, with your help, we will deliver 30,000 holiday pantry boxes, 25,000 meals and care packages, and 2 million shekels in grocery cards so that Holocaust survivors can shop with dignity for the holidays. Together, we can bring them warmth, nourishment, and the sweetness of a new year. So please, if you want to help, go to bless-israel.org. Again, that's bless-israel.org and bless Israel survivors today. Now, we are switching our focus to diplomatic developments, as the United States President Donald Trump spoke to reporters on Tuesday evening saying, amongst other things, that the Hamas terrorist organization must disarm or it will be disarmed by force. According to him, this will happen quickly and perhaps violently, but they will disarm. I spoke with Hamas and they said that they will disarm, according to Trump. During the press conference, the president confirmed that his representatives at the highest level, apparently referring to Witkoff and Kushner, spoke directly with Hamas representatives. These statements align with the publication on the Axios website, which reported a meeting between Witkoff and Kushner and Khalil El-Khaya, who headed the organization's negotiations team. When asked about the issue, Trump said that the disarmament of Hamas would be done within a reasonable time. He added that they know that I do not play in games. We told them to disarm, and if they don't do it, we will make sure that they are disarmed, and it will be quick and violent. President Trump also referred to Hamas's actions in the Gaza Strip, where it is working to suppress its opponents, and clarified that he does not really care about that, saying that Hamas apparently dealt with some gang people, and that doesn't really bother me, according to Trump. Already the day before yesterday, it should be noted that he hinted that he gave approval to Hamas to manage internal security in the Gaza Strip as it sees fit in the immediate timeline. despite the chaos and despite the bloodshed. It should be also noted that reports indicate that the people that Hamas is cracking down on are not just criminals and gangs, but also they include anyone who has spoken up with a desire for Gaza not to be ruled by the Hamas terrorists or taking any kind of action to try and free the Strip from Hamas's rule. In any case, these statements by Trump come in the shadow of Hamas's attempt to impose order in the Gaza Strip and to determine who is the boss. The day after the war, even though the agreement stipulates that the terrorist organization will no longer rule the Gaza Strip. It appears that Hamas is not quite ready to give up its power though, as they have launched a comprehensive plan to eliminate any competing power blocks inside the Gaza Strip amongst the Palestinian people. They have even given this plan an official sounding name, Operation Restoring Security and Governance, which opponents say is just an old-fashioned reign of terror meant to instill fear amongst the Palestinians. However, Hamas insists that they are simply acting responsibly to make sure there is no security vacuum in the Gaza Strip, and they also insist that they would comply with the provisions of the Trump peace plan that they say will not be the ruling party in the Gaza Strip moving forward. They also insist that they are merely acting to lay the groundwork for Palestinian rule inside Gaza, as they say is unacceptable for an outside party to do so other than the Palestinians themselves. And part of this, according to Hamas, is a need to purge the Gaza Strip of traitors. In practice, it is an operation intended to remind residents, Palestinians of Gaza, who the real ruler really is, which is Hamas. To this end, the director of the government media office in the Gaza Strip, Ismail Taubatel, claimed yesterday that more than 70 gang members turned themselves in and handed over their weapons as part of the amnesty initiative, and more than 50 gang humps were eliminated. According to him, we will not allow any party to interfere in the security of the Palestinian people, and we will continue to step until we reach a security level of 100%. It is also important to point out that Hamas currently controls more than 90% of the areas from which the IDF withdrew and is reactivating the security mechanisms, the police and the civil defense. In other words, the Gaza Strip is gradually returning to the situation before October 7th, with Hamas as the de facto ruling entity. In parallel with field operations, Hamas is waging a broad media campaign to justify its actions, and on channels identified with the organization, announcements began to be published aimed at persuading that these are security operations against collaborators. What do you think about all of this? Let me know in the comments section. As all of this was going on in the Gaza Strip, things were also happening inside Israel. And Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu gave an interview to the American network CBS on Tuesday evening, in which he said, "We agreed to give peace a chance, but President Trump's conditions were clear. Hamas must be disarmed and must give up its weapons inside Gaza or everything will erupt." Netanyahu referred to the release of all the living hostages and said later in this interview that he hopes that the next stage in Trump's plan for the Gaza Strip will be implemented. After Hamas gives up its weapons, we need to ensure that there are no weapons, no factories inside of the Gaza Strip that can produce weapons. There will be no smuggling. That is demilitarization, complete demilitarization of the Gaza Strip. I hope we can do this by peaceful means. We are ready for that. Anyone who doubts that should look at the Abraham Accords. We have an opportunity to expand them, to expand peace. That is the greatest gift that we can bring to the people of Israel and to the people of the world. On Tuesday morning, Trump tweeted on his Truth social media network after departing from the region that we achieved a great deal in Israel and in Egypt. There was a lot of work, but I wouldn't have done it any other way. It was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. He added that the countries that have fought for so long will now act together to complete this mission. Gaza is only a part, and the big thing is peace in the entire Middle East. Thus he again hinted at the future of this region as he sees it. a hint he also voiced in his speech in the Knesset, which includes dramatic peace arrangement between Israel and other countries. Here at TBN Israel, we will keep reporting on everything that's happening, every development in the diplomatic arena in the Middle East. So keep spreading the truth, share, leave a comment, hit the like button, and make sure to subscribe to TBN Israel YouTube channel so that we never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. And now, we will move on to TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani, who will wrap up all the details about what happened at the summit in Sharm el-Sheikh after President Trump left Israel. Over to you, Mati.
That's right, the action continues as Trump traveled to Sharm el-Sheikh to a regional summit that really took everything that happened to Israel and kicked it into overdrive. Now let me break down over the next couple minutes how important, how dramatic, how historic and significant this visit, this summit that took place in the Sharm el-Sheikh summit actually was. Now Trump was on a victory lap here in the Middle East, sort of collecting the laurels that he so deserved for being able to barter or bring together a peace agreement between Israel, Hamas, and several other countries. But really the big piece here, the significant piece, is the fact that this is a regional agreement and not just something that's limited to a certain small number of countries. This isn't just Israel and Hamas, it's not just the Qataris, it's not just the Palestinian Authority, it's everyone, everywhere really doing what's needed to reshape the region that we're living in. And that's what that summit looked like. President Trump, after a very dramatic, very important, very significant visit to the state of Israel where the hostages are released, he arrives in Sharm el-Sheikh, which is Sinai, the peninsula in Egypt, and he there signs a deal for, let's call it, regional stability, regional peace. And the big winners of that agreement are not the European countries that attended, but rather the Arab countries, the Qataris, the Emiratis, and the Turks, of course, that were involved in this agreement. And out of the agreement comes a joint declaration released by the White House from this peace summit that is signed by President Trump. It's signed by President Sisi, signed by President Erdogan of Turkey, and the Emir of Qatar. And the text of that message says very clearly that they're going for lasting peace in the Middle East, protecting rights and security for both the Israelis and the Palestinians, fighting extremism, and resolving disputes in a diplomatic sense. Trump gave one of his famous shows on stage. It almost seems like a combination of a stand-up show, but a very bold proclamation of where this is going. He was upbeat, he was assertive, he praised Erdogan as a tough cookie, but again, as the person that really helped bring this deal together. And he said that there will be no excuses for Hamas going forward. So what really happened on that stage? Was this just a show for the press, or was this a dramatic event that we need to break down? Well, I'm going to tell you it's the latter. The event that took place here just a couple days ago was an event that's going to reshape the region that we're living in a way that people didn't see coming. It's both dramatic, it reshapes geopolitics, it repositions the US and other countries in the place they should be when it comes to the power balance in this region, and more importantly, it is the only way to stabilize the very tense situation that exists on the ground here in Israel, and specifically when it relates to the Gaza Strip. So the first phase of this agreement relates to what already took place, which is phase one of the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas. The main pieces in that have already materialized in front of our eyes over the last 48 hours, or actually 4 to 5 days if you count the moment of agreeing to this agreement. And the key components in that were releasing the hostages, and specifically the living ones, which has already taken place to the great joy of people in Israel, withdrawing IDF forces back in the Gaza Strip, which too has already taken place, starting a movement of humanitarian aid and removal of Hamas from the Gaza Strip, which that is the part that has yet to have happened. Because a main component in all of this was a question of how is the Gaza Strip going to look in the day after Hamas? And this is an interesting question because it's very hard to replace a terrorist organization that doesn't want to be replaced. And unsurprisingly, Hamas has said very clearly, we're not planning to go anywhere. They might have agreed to the hostage exchange, but they definitely haven't agreed to be disarmed or removed from the Gaza Strip. And in fact, in recent days, we've seen Hamas push back quickly, strongly, and violently against any collaborator or possible faction that could take over their role of power in the Gaza Strip. So I want to be clear about what's going to happen in the Gaza Strip. First of all, there's supposed to be a transitional government that removes Hamas from civil governance and finally also removes the need for the IDF to fight in the Gaza Strip. And I'll get to the details of that in just a second. But it's important to note and be aware of the fact that the minute the IDF withdrew from the Gaza Strip, well, what happened? Well, what happened is what you would expect from a terrorist organization. Rampant violence against anyone suspected of collaborating with the IDF, and of course, any faction that could pose a threat to the governance and control that Hamas has over that area. That is what we saw in the Gaza Strip. We've seen dozens murdered by Hamas within just a couple days that have existed since the IDF withdrew, and that really begs the question of how are we going to impose a transitional government or a transitional force that can remove Hamas? So here's the plan that was presented in Sharm el-Sheikh. This is presented in part and backed in part by the Egyptian government, President Sisi, and what it's supposed to be is supposed to be a technocrat government that represents 15 different people that are elected by the different countries and Palestinian factions that are involved in all of this. And what they're supposed to do, they're supposed to be the administrative council that governs everyday civil life in the Gaza Strip. Because now that Israel's out, someone needs to make sure that the sewage is cleaned, that the trash is removed, that food is distributed within the Gaza Strip, and especially when it comes to the massive rebuilding project that's planned, you need someone that isn't Hamas to do that. Because if we go back to having Hamas being the party that runs business on the Gaza Strip, well, that really is a loss for everyone that was involved, because a key factor in this entire negotiation is Hamas being removed from power. A major component of this entire deal is the rapid and dramatic rebuilding of the Gaza Strip. This includes infrastructure, this includes hospitals, this includes bakeries that would supply the everyday needs of life for people in the Gaza Strip to get back to life. Because before the houses are rebuilt and the facilities are rebuilt, you need roads, you need electricity, you need water. Much of these infrastructures have been damaged by the 2-year war that has taken place between Hamas and the IDF. And I want to remind you that Hamas has used almost every building in the Gaza Strip to hide bombs or munitions in this war, and the levels of destruction we're seeing are tied directly to that. This entire package is going to be financed by the member states of this treaty. The Qataris, the Saudis, the Emiratis, and of course the Turks, the Egyptians, are all going to be involved in both facilitating and funding this. President Trump, in his speech in the Israeli Knesset just the other day, talks about this extensively in talking about the fact that he was the one who was able to bring the countries with the deep pockets to the table, bring them into the fold when it comes to this agreement with Hamas and with rebuilding the Gaza Strip. Another key component here is, although the fact that the European countries were not a key player in this discussion, in this conversation, there's still going to be a plan or part of rebuilding the Gaza Strip and specifically the power of the Palestinian Authority. Let me explain that for just a second. The fact that the Palestinian Authority isn't involved today in rebuilding the Gaza Strip doesn't mean that global powers don't want them to be involved in the future. And this is where things get a little complicated, and we need to dive into the details. Part of the Trump 21-point plan for rebuilding the Gaza Strip includes a series of reforms to take place in the Palestinian Authority outside of the Gaza Strip. So that's dealing with corruption, dealing with their inability to execute projects, dealing with their inability to carry out or control the security elements, even in Judea and Samaria today. And the plan is, with the help of European money and European governance, to help rebuild both the mechanisms that would build the Gaza Strip and strengthen the Palestinian Authority, and the funding needed to do exactly that. How much are we talking about? We're talking about hundreds of millions of euros that will be needed to reform the Palestinian Authority, which has been a very sick organization for many years. And of course, all the additional funds that are required for the humanitarian and logistical effort of bringing in external forces, specifically those from the Palestinian Authority, to rebuild the Gaza Strip. This is no easy feat. And in tying in all these different countries, President Trump has done something very wise. He's pulled in the Europeans for the logistics, for the planning, for the international aid organizations that will be a pivotal part of rebuilding the Gaza Strip and the Palestinian Authority. But he's also brought in the funding and the ability to move fast and effectively that exists in some of the Gulf states, and of course tied in all the regional powers, specifically the Egyptians and the Turks, to make sure that the map of interest is aligned in the right way for the rebuilding of the Gaza Strip and what's needed in the years to come. A key component of this entire package is disarming Hamas and removing them from power within the Gaza Strip. And that's exactly what is very complicated and requires a huge amount of effort and details to carry out. Since Israel started withdrawing from the Gaza Strip, Hamas has already taken back much of the territory that the IDF held previously. It's also carried out a series of violent attacks against any collaborator on the Israeli side or organizations they suspect could be competition for them within the Gaza Strip itself. Now that shouldn't come as a surprise. Hamas has controlled the Gaza Strip for several decades now, and they know how to maintain that grip even after this extended war season. In fact, it's said that the day after the IDF withdrew and the ceasefire kicked into action, Hamas started collecting taxes once more in the Gaza Strip. Look guys, these people are professionals at controlling and spreading fear in the civilian population. And they're continuing to do that and will continue until they are removed from power. That's why this key component of removing Hamas, both from power and civilian life in the Gaza Strip, is a key piece of this entire agreement. And without it, we simply don't have a long-term solution for the Gaza Strip. That's going to take international aid, international support, and some brave and gutsy members of the Arab states to really put up the manpower and people that it will take to clean house in the Gaza Strip and bring in someone else so that someday soon we can see a different situation on the ground in the Gaza Strip. Let me talk about two of the biggest winners of this entire Sharm el-Sheikh summit, Qatar and Turkey. Two countries who without them we couldn't have the deal, and without them we don't have a solution for the Gaza Strip. Trump talked about this when he addressed the Israeli public a couple days ago, and he spoke about it again when he was in Sharm el-Sheikh at the summit itself. And here are the details that make this clear. Without the clout, without the pressure that Turkey knows how to impose on this region, we couldn't have an agreement, and we can't expect to have sustained stability that allows that agreement. They've been a strong force in influencing what's happening in Syria and other parts of the Middle East, and are a regional superpower that affects money, manpower, and the move of terrorism around the world. In fact, they have a chokehold on Hamas leadership that exists outside of the boundaries of Judea and Samaria and the Gaza Strip that allows them to really speak into what that organization does and how it does it in real time. And it gets more complex. Without the Qatari money that is needed to really change things, we wouldn't be able to have this agreement. Rebuilding the Gaza Strip, rebuilding the government to rule the people of Gaza is going to cost tens of billions. For the Qataris and some other friends in the Middle East, that's pocket change. For countries like Israel or the Palestinians themselves, that would be a deal breaker. And that's why it is so pivotal and important that all these countries are part of this new deal. There's an interesting element here, which is the European countries. So both France and the UK have wanted to be part of this deal and want to be part of reshaping the Middle East. And in both cases, the US looks at their involvement and says, we want it to be clear for everyone who was in this conversation that you guys, France and the British government, were not able to bring this deal to fruition. You might have a place at the table for the next phase of this, but right now your effect in this negotiation was minimal, if that. And it's interesting because the UK has tried to claim that they had a pivotal role in this agreement, and the US officially says that is simply not true. We were the ones that brought forth this deal. We did it together with these Arab countries, or these Muslim countries, the Turks and the Qataris, and you didn't have part in bringing this deal forward. That's the truth here. And it's important to know because it really shows you the shift in power balance here in the Middle East in a dramatic way. The next days and weeks are going to be dramatic in seeing if this agreement, if this regional deal that was signed in Sharm el-Sheikh will be able to really pull the strings that are necessary to reshape life on the ground in the Gaza Strip. It will show us whether or not this coalition of countries will be able to pull out Hamas and put in a different technocrat government. Israel, of course, has to approve the list of 15 officials that are supposed to take place or take over governance in the Gaza Strip, but that's only a small piece in it. The big piece is really removing Hamas from power. And to do that, we're going to need to see some serious grit, some serious work on behalf of multiple countries to really see this take place. There's another element here, which is Israel watching to see if Hamas stops being an active terrorist organization in the Gaza Strip. We have patience. We can wait a couple days or a couple weeks. Of course, we're still not fully done with the hostage exchange, but, and this is a big but, we need to see things change and Hamas no longer be in power for things to move forward. With the completion of the hostage deal, Hamas being put on a back burner or a lesser degree, and the regional pact that's been created in recent weeks, we're looking at a new Middle East. A Middle East that could be transformed into one where financial prosperity is once again an option, where peace and stability that are so needed in this region for financial prosperity and for people to live in peace is once again an option. That's where we're going. And this happened because of the strong and bold leadership of Donald Trump, Prime Minister Netanyahu, and several other leaders in the Muslim world that really brought this all together. These are dramatic days, these are dramatic times, but if things go right, we could be looking at a transformed Middle East for many years to come.
Thank you, Mati Shoshani, for this analysis of our fast-moving situation here in the Middle East. And here, at Boots on the Ground, we will continue to bring you the most up-to-date reports on what's happening in Israel. So give a click to the subscribe button on YouTube so that you never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. And now, we move to a report out of Iran, which on Tuesday sent another threat towards Israel, this time with an escalation. In an AI video distributed by the Iranian regime, a nuclear missile has been ready for launch under the caption, "Maybe." In addition, Iran is now sending another threat in Hebrew, calling on the residents of Israel to evacuate Haifa, a huge Israeli city, and also Jaffa, urgently because it plans to strike them with force. The war is only beginning, according to the Iranians. It is important to emphasize that to this day, no one is absolutely sure whether or not Iran has a nuclear weapon. But recent reports indicate that it is definitely close to having the ability to produce them. And that was essentially the reason that Israel launched an operation against Iran in June. The Ayatollah regime was humiliated by the ease with which Israel destroyed its air defensive networks and operated in the skies over Iranian cities and military bases with impunity, demolishing their ballistic missile production facilities and many other strategic targets. They do not want to admit that they have suffered such a devastating setback and are even refusing to admit that Israel and Israeli aircrafts penetrated their airspace, which is only one of the many absurd lies that they are telling their own people and the entire world. In my humble opinion, the regime is panicking because they see that President Trump's plan to expand the Abraham Accords and otherwise change the face of the Middle East appears to have a lot of buy-in from the Arab governments. That is the last thing that the Ayatollahs want, and so they are trying to create obstacles for this plan. Iran's foreign ministry published a statement on Tuesday referring to Trump's proposals for an agreement that were brought in his speech in the Israeli Knesset on Monday, saying his desire for peace and dialogue stands in contradiction to the criminal and hostile behavior of the United States towards Iran. Perhaps they are referring to the comments that President Trump made to the effect that this is a very exciting time for Israel and for the entire Middle East. Across the Middle East, the forces of chaos, terror, and destruction that have harmed the region for many decades now stand isolated and completely defeated. A new coalition of proud and independent states has arisen, and now the entire civilization of evil is in retreat. Many of Iran's leading terrorists, including senior nuclear scientists, were simply eliminated. And in Midnight Hammer, the United States of America and its military flew 7 B-2 bombers that are so beautiful, I don't know they could do everything that they did, but they did it. Everyone understands that the #1 country that supported terror and supplied it with weapons has fallen from its greatness. And if we hadn't done that, we wouldn't have the deal that exists today. We wouldn't have felt comfortable signing the deal that we signed if Iran had nuclear weapons, that they were 2 months away from obtaining. This was the last opportunity. We managed to remove a very heavy cloud from the skies of the Middle East and over Israel, according to Donald Trump. They told me that they've started again with the nuclear program the president shared. And I say, they're not starting anything. They want to survive. The last thing that they want to do is to drill again into the mountains that were blown up. Now, getting back to President Trump, Even before he arrived to Israel, during his flight on Air Force One, he said that the Iranians were weeks away from a nuclear weapon, but it was like a black cloud over everything. The strike on Iran's nuclear facilities allowed the Arab and the Muslim countries to feel freer to unite around achieving an agreement in the Gaza Strip, and also caused Hamas to be more willing to compromise after its Iranian allies were weakened. If anyone from the Ayatollah regime is watching this report, I say to you that I can understand why you didn't like the words of American President Donald Trump, what he said about you. But I must also tell you that he didn't say anything that anyone in all the countries surrounding you, as well as tens of millions of your own people, are thinking. Maybe you should take a moment to stop and think about how much you didn't like it, and consider if what he said about you is actually true. You're never going to solve any of your problems by lying to yourselves and investing in weapons and terrorist organizations in this region. No one ever does. Here at TBN Israel, we are committed to spreading the truth, to let you know what's happening here on the ground. Things are unfolding very fast, and we need your help, because this is a spiritual war. The only way we can fight a spiritual war is by praying and uniting in faith. So let's do that. Now we need your prayers more than ever. The hostages are back. They have a long journey of rebuilding their lives, physically and then emotionally and mentally. They've been in the terror tunnels of Hamas for 2 years. They need your help, your prayers. Let's pray also for the IDF soldiers that are defending us inside the Gaza from these terrorist organizations, Hamas. Let's pray for the innocent Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip that are under the rule of Hamas terrorists. Now, let's pray for the Iranian people, let's pray for the Lebanese people, let's pray for the Syrian people, for the peoples in Yemen. Let's pray for all of them to have a change of heart and start loving the Jewish people, the people of Israel, and have God inside their hearts. Let's pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.